Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. And I will start with comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda. All right, seeing none, we will move on to any amendments to the agenda.
We have none.
Okay. All right, we will move to our announcements and student rep report. Alex?
Next week at the high school is CAP week, which is the final week of projects and stuff. Graduation is next Friday the 15th, and tomorrow is the last day of classes. In the last 2 weeks, on the 31st was Academics Awards Night. Sports Awards Night was on the 24th, and our sports have been doing a really good job, and special congratulations to the boys baseball and girls tennis, who are both in state championships this week. That's all I have. Yeah.
Sorry, but I want to point this out.
Yeah.
We had on the track team,
Oh.
we had the 800-meter state champion Jackson Hellman, in a very fast time, and I was just really impressed. And being a track fan, I want to point that out.
Yeah.
Camille, who's the first year freshman,
Yes.
also won the state championship
Yeah.
in 3K.
Yeah, truly inspiring. Thank you.
There was a lot of personal records, and the girls got second, which was really impressive too. So yeah.
Great. Any other announcements?
Just, briefly, we've got graduation is on the 15th. It's a beautiful event. Those that wish to come, school board members, obviously we have a school board kicks it off, school board member kicks that off, but certainly any board members are welcome to come. The St. Mike's venue and how Patrick and his team run it is outstanding, and it's a wonderful event at St. Mike's. So that's on the 15th, 10 o'clock. That's it.
Great. All right, we will move to agenda item 6, city and school collaboration.
So I'll just, we do not have another date set currently with Kevin Dorn, the city manager, and Helen. Although we're soon to get that, I think we're working out our schedule. We're a little bit off because the next scheduled meeting would be on the 15th, but we're at graduation. So we'll be figuring that out. This past Monday, June 4th, we had a joint meeting with the City Council, School Board and the City Council, where an agreement on an MOU was established. That MOU was specific to the conveyance of some land at the Rick Marcotte School in exchange for property at 575, which is directly across from the high school, middle school campus. That will then move us forward to a November possible vote with the public, and we'll be working on the details of that from now until that date. I don't know if there's anything else that under city school, we have a lot going on there, but that's probably the biggest component.
Yeah, and maybe just to clarify for public who was not at the Monday meeting or will not read about it, this is a non-binding memorandum of understanding with the city, between the city and the school district, and the overriding principles that the school really took into establishing this were consistency with the master planning and visioning process, really looking at the future needs primarily of our elementary schools. We looked also at safety and security issues, and we also considered fiduciary responsibilities as representatives of the community, specifically to the school district. So we felt like the memorandum of understanding that has been signed by both parties in terms of moving forward really addresses those concerns and those issues, and we believe it's a really potential win-win for the entire community, looking at a library facility, senior center, and always in the city offices at on that parcel that would be carved out leased to the city by the school district. So it's an exciting opportunity moving forward, and we all have a lot of work to do to get to a formal memorandum of understanding.
Yeah. And even if everything goes through, I think it's important for people to know that, if a November vote happens positively, we have some work to do to, that has to happen in order for everybody to recognize the actual desired outcome of the city center as well as the 575 piece. But that's an important component to the board, I think, also around master planning and visioning, which is part of a conversation that's coming up later on this evening. So, thanks.
All right. Anything else from the rest of the board on city school? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 7. This is raising the Black Lives Matter flag at South Burlington High School.
So
And this is
Elizabeth,
currently warned for action.
we're a little bit ahead of time, but
Okay.
I think, my hope is that people who are wanting to be here are here. There may be some people that come in a little bit later, but again, I think it's important that we move on to this agenda item and ask for that to begin. We're a little ahead of schedule, though.
Okay, and my understanding is that there may be some brief student comments to be made?
Actually, you actually can come up here. It might be easier. Come on up here. Students, you can bring a chair too. It's easier. Just have to take our nails mic for a second. Is that all right? We'll bring the chairs. I get the chairs.
Yes. See here, go up, two at a time.
If you could just introduce yourself before you speak, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ada Arns. I'm one of the co-presidents of the Student Diversity Union. I'll just read my statement. So the Black Lives Matter flag not only asks us to consider uncomfortable realities and to challenge our complicity within them, but it asks us to act on that discomfort. The Black Lives Matter flag affirms that we value and will stand for our Black students and students of color, and it challenges our white students to consider and question their society and its failure to value all members equally. With an educational assembly included as a necessary corresponding component to the raising of the flag, I know that the importance of the Black Lives Matter flag would not be lost on my peers. I am greatly appreciative of the support shown by the board last month. The board responded to our proposal with empathy, positive feedback, and pertinent questions as to how we can continue to make our school more equitable beyond the symbolism of the flag. With one more week left as a student at South Burlington High School, I am reflecting upon the 4 years I have spent here. If the board is to respond to our proposal with a yes, I would leave high school knowing that my community is stronger than when I entered.
So I'm Rachel. I'm the secretary of SDU this year and future vice president. The last school board meeting was my first ever. My only knowledge on how they go is based off of what I've heard, but that meeting exceeded my expectations. Your overwhelming support and open minds allowed me to leave with a sense of hope. It made me optimistic that sharing our perspectives and experiences would make a difference in this community. A yes vote tonight would assure that that is true. A yes vote would show me, this club, and our supporters that South Burlington believes Black Lives Matter, and in that they believe in us, the students, the future. Raising this flag would not just be the raising of a flag. It would be an opportunity to educate my peers at SBHS on why Black Lives Matter and how to share their voices to make a change.
I'm Tabita. I'm the other co-president and currently a junior. Since being a part of the South Burlington School District, I had never truly felt heard within my school and community. After the last board meeting, I feel as though I was finally heard. I would like to thank you all for letting that be our experience. By raising the Black Lives Matter flag during Black History Month, we are allowing all students of color to be able to feel the way we did after that meeting, and also feel as though they have a place within our school and community. I want to thank you all for listening to our stories and open-mindedness and understanding. All lives can't matter until Black lives do, and I hope we can move into a world where we can say all lives matter and know that it's the truth. Thank you.
I'm Sammy. I am the communications director of SDU. The support that we got after our presentation at the last school board meeting was amazing. It made us all feel as though we were heard and the thoughts that we shared were truly valued and respected. Voting yes to raise this flag will not only empower Black students by showing that this community values Black lives, but also empower students to use their voices and to speak up about issues that are important to them. Creating change is essential for a more inclusive future, and I hope that our community can take this step forward by voting to raise the flag.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm the Vice President of SDU this year. When I heard the overwhelmingly positive response from the school board saying that they were in favor of raising the flag, I felt very moved because it was really putting into action the mission of the Student Diversity Union, which is to challenge racism in our schools, our community, and beyond. Voting yes to raising the Black Lives Matter flag will support our club's mission because it will initiate a conversation in the community that is necessary to have. It will draw attention to our school, but it will also set a leading example for other schools around the country, and even make it possible for students in other schools to raise their own flag. Positive change is necessary for making our school and our community a more inclusive and welcoming place.
Thank
you.
Want to have further discussion? Any other comments from the public before the board has discussion? Okay, and let me clarify, the current proposal, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the students are asking for the Black Lives Matter flag to fly at the high school in the month of February in recognition of Black History Month, and also, am I correct, is the purchase of a flag as well? Maybe I should clarify the request.
I think that's the reason. That's correct.
And I believe the price was around, was it 500 or 600? No.
No.
Okay, I don't know what the price is. It's how much?
Less than 100.
Less than 100, thank you.
And those were the primary components of the proposal, correct?
There also is an educational element
Yes.
to the raising in terms of either we intend to have an educational element connected to the raising of the flag, assembly, advisory meetings, etc.
All right, why don't I start with, do I have a motion?
So moved. I'll second it.
So what is the motion to make?
Do you want to clarify the
Well,
motion?
I just want to clarify, do we have a formal recommendation? Because I thought that the way, the procedure was that Dave was going to make a formal recommendation. and
We
then
did,
were
yeah, we
gonna-
did ask for, we can,
Okay.
we can still have a motion and have discussion following.
Okay. So I would move that we approve the proposal to raise the Black Lives Matter flag during the month of February.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay, further discussion? We did ask specifically for a recommendation from administration at this meeting.
So I am, again, you heard from Patrick in his letter. He was not here at the last meeting, but he had a letter read by Alyssa McDonald, rationale and reason. I also support both Patrick and also the students' request for the month of February for the flag to fly.
Any further board discussion?
I have a question. Yeah, I believe it was discussed at the last meeting that it was to be flown at the Munson Field. Are we restricting it to the Munson Field? Because there's not going to be a whole lot of activity on the Munson Field.
It was the high school.
in February.
It was the high school
So we're
flagpole.
generalizing it to the high school. Great,
Right.
thank you.
I think, Steve, you had also brought up some question about
Flag.
protocol around
Yeah, I mean, I
the
think
flag.
we're talking about, what, 9 months? I think we have time to take that up.
I mean, I'm happy to just
Need to get in the way of.
There's general flag protocol, you know, with the American flag and other flags, you know, cannot fly higher, cannot be bit larger, you know, that's general flag protocol in our country, which is very specifically outlined. Obviously, we would be following that, so if we were flying, if the flag that we were attempting to fly, the American flag, was significantly smaller, we would have to make that adjustment so that it's not smaller than any of the other flags that might be flying. Again, there's protocols on the Vermont state flag and any other flag that may fly beside them. There's specific protocol that outlines that.
Sorry, yes, I researched, By my read of the flag, both the US flag code and Vermont statute, there's no prohibition against something
Yeah, and
like this.
I didn't know if you wanted a friendly amendment to the motion to include some review of that, of a more formal policy of sorts.
It doesn't need to be part of this, I don't think.
All right. Any other further comments from the board?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think I thank the students for bringing this forward. I thought you were very compelling, and this is certainly the right thing to do. And also the recommendation in the letter from Principal Burke was also very compelling. So I'm all for this.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion passes. Congratulations. Now, though I know you want to stay for this additional business, don't feel bad if you, if you have to leave. All right, we will move on to agenda item 8, master planning and visioning.
Why? Pray tell why.
You're not excused.
So I'm not seeing ATC folks yet here. So John, are you looking, John Stewart, are you looking for any of the ATC folks? Are they here yet?
I said 7:30. It's on 7:45 on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
We're ahead, so we could jump.
Okay. So why don't we jump to the agenda item 9, the policy review. We do have this warned for action. It's the third reading of policy B1, which is board member conflict of interest, and third reading for policy B2, board member code of conduct.
I move that we approve policy B1, the board member conflict of interest.
Second. Any reason we can't move both, or?
I was going to move them one at a time.
Okay.
I'm just grabbing a Martin.
We've got time, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I got it if you want.
I've got it here. All right, we have a motion to approve the board member conflict of interest, policy B1. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes.
And I'll move that we approve policy B2, the board members code of conduct.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes.
Got that one done.
Those will be available for signature at the end of the meeting, so please make sure we stay. So why don't we keep going on agenda item 10, which is the school board meeting schedule.
It's also in your packet. It's a second draft. We made a revision from the last meeting. We had a couple changes, which I can't recall.
I think in March.
March, right, that's right. So I think this reflects, again, this can be, we wanted to get this adopted if we can, so that we are able to get that published and ready to go, so. Also, the July 11th meeting was one that we kept as a placeholder for any new hires that we would have, but it could be a very brief meeting, was the conversation, either a phone conference meeting to get any new hires done. I think those were the conversations.
I move that we approve the school board meeting calendar for 2018-2019.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The calendar is approved, and I would just ask that people maybe take a look kind of ahead a couple months, so if there are conflicts, we have an opportunity, and as long as we have a quorum of the board, we can keep moving forward on this, but we've tried to accommodate people's schedules as throughout the year.
I won't be here on October 3rd.
Which
No,
one?
October 3rd, no Martin, okay?
All right. All right, and we'll move forward on agenda item 11, school-based continuous improvement plan for the middle school.
So this was, again, we had Stuart here alluded to, there was a need for some upgrade and changes. It actually didn't print correctly, I don't think, was the way it happened.
We actually had a complete one, but that was not the one that was in your packet.
So this one is the new one.
Next morning, and so this is the complete middle school plan, matches with the others, and actually since then, even the state has approved them all, but you still need to approve as well.
So, do we have a motion to approve the CIP plan for Tuttle Middle School?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the motion passes.
Great, thank you.
Maybe our most efficient meeting yet. All right, are we still?
Yeah, we're still waiting for ATC folks to show up here.
Okay,
As
so
soon as
why
they
don't
come, we'll,
we move on to agenda item 12 then, the executive limitations policy on 2.1 treatment of parents and guardians.
okay. So this is on for action, although you don't have to take action tonight on this. Again, this represents, there are changes here, obviously, that represent more accurately evidence that's changed from the previous monitoring report. You'll see that either the strikeouts and the additions, where those are at. I don't think there's anything significant there. I do think on page 7, we start getting into some of the complaint entries that we've had. I know there's been, we've paid attention to that and made sure you're aware. And then also on page, actually I skipped ahead where we have some of the number of incidences are also reported. Page 6, thank you, Bridget. I do have, if board members wanted to see the detail on what those were, remember under the type of request that was added, I had a much more broad category in the earlier years. And again, I think suggestion, if I recall, by Martin, we put a little bit more additional detail in there. If you want more, then we do have record of that in our office. I did not include that, however, because it has some more specific information, and I didn't want to put it out to the public. So I think those are the major changes. Happy to answer questions.
On page 3, there were a lot of strikeouts toward the end of the first real full paragraph there. The last sentence basically says that we can assess personal development. And it doesn't really talk about, other, is that really all that we can assess at this?
So you're on policy number 2, which starts on page 2?
It starts on page 2, yeah. So,
Yeah.
yes, in detail policy 2, I'm sorry.
So it's about soliciting appropriate input.
Yeah.
To obtain necessary information. So obviously it's really specific about getting that input, and so that's the evidence in how we collect information along the way. And then, so you on page 3 are asking specifically about the last.
We just cut off a lot of things that, I mean.
It's just that we didn't do surveys about
That's
them
right.
this year.
Yeah.
So we can't just take them off, we have to strike them. In given years, another year, we might be doing surveys about those things, so we could leave them there. The basic is that we didn't solicit any information this year about those things that are struck, where we had the year before.
Okay.
We still have information that provides evidence to that, but we don't do them annually, right? Just like the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, we don't have back. Actually, we've just gotten it back, but
Well, we have the state.
but not our yet individual data. So I can't include that here. It would be wrong for me to have it included.
Well, actually, it was in last year's piece because they actually did the survey last spring.
Right.
not this year.
Yeah.
And where are we on the ENDS survey? Because we don't have a whole lot of data points other than the standardized tests on the ENDS survey about where we are in terms of meeting ENDS. And I know we had sort of talked about it a lot last year.
Yeah,
Where
I think
do
we
we
have to
stand?
revise the survey. There was comments from the, we went over that data quite a bit last year, but this year it just didn't happen. Probably should have. And I take responsibility for that. However, I would want to point out that at least we're doing really well in citizenship as determined by the presence tonight. That's my report on citizenship.
So that does read, I mean, the way this reads is we can assess personal development, but it keeps in the parens of resilient schools, PBIS, and trauma training.
Right, because those are the surveys we did.
We did
I added
do.
some of those might be added too.
So those were surveys.
Yes.
Correct.
Should we call that out? Because I'm not sure if that's called out. Okay, it does say this is
Yeah.
particularly true of surveys,
Right.
but it doesn't.
It just in parentheses that
says
we did them,
awkward,
that, yeah, we could maybe clarify that a little bit, that those were surveys specific to.
yeah,
provide-
those
If there's just
surveys
an
aren't
extra
linked to
sentence
the-
that says that
Yeah.
this just reflects the
Fine.
surveys that were done this year, it's just confusing, because
Yeah.
if you're just reading it cold, it kind of feels like, oh, we're just not assessing these
it's good.
things anymore in any way.
Good feedback.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't know what to do about it. I find this policy very awkward because it has such a broad statement that it's about the treatment of students and parents and guardians, and then 80 or 90% of it is really taken up with, how we do surveys and how we shift information about in the district. And some of it's related to parents and students.
Yeah,
It
well-
sort of feels like, there is a connection, but it feels to me like we're somehow missing something.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I
it's
just-
hard to put a finger on, but for example, we talk a lot about how we're getting information from parents and guardians or students, but not how we're providing information to as
Yeah.
much. I know we talk about NEO in here and, the student information system and all that, but it just feels strange, and I don't know.
I don't disagree.
how
I
to
think
be
when
more
you,
articulate
when you
about
get
that,
in,
to be honest.
when you get into the evidence, you want to kind of, like, it doesn't seem to be quite enough. But I think if you go back up to the particular monitoring report in the main one, remember, we're specifically looking for interactions, right, with parents and guardians, and ensuring that I don't cause
Yeah.
conditions, procedures, or decisions that are, inequitable, untimely, vague. right?
Yeah.
And so simply what I believe the monitoring report is doing is, has a check and balance system on the system to say, are there things in place that allow for those interactions to occur? And it may not all be one way for some parents and guardians. It may be a variety of ways, which is kind of why the array of evidence is there.
Like I said, I
you
don't
know?
really have a solution or proposal about it. It just seems, yeah.
Yeah, and in part, we wouldn't want it to be, I don't know, like eliciting information. You wouldn't want to have an exorbitant amount of information that I'm trying to collect from parents and guardians that would be exhaustive, but at the same time, we need to collect appropriate amounts. That's kind of back to the
Yeah, I
general
guess the
policy.
awkwardness for me is less about the specifics of how we're collecting information or what information
Mm-hmm.
we're collecting, but this sounds like a broader policy when you read the
Mm-hmm.
headline of the policy and it goes right to just the information collection bit.
Right.
And so I think that the evidence here, reflects what's actually in the details of the policy. It just feels like perhaps the policy might be missing some level of interaction with parents or what might be expected by parents. I don't think there's anything wrong with the evidence that's provided, just to be clear. It just feels like a kind of it's just hard to understand where in our policy monitoring, we're monitoring how we're actually sort of cultivating relationships with parents. And that's more than just collecting information from them. That's more than just, these very transactional, things. And those are hard to write policies about because they're more hands-on things. So I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying it comes up for me every time we read this policy every year. It's just a little.
Well, I'm
awkward.
open to, feedback along the way. I mean, part of that is we don't see it on a regular basis, so when it does come up, you wonder if I'm open to, other ideas on how we can, I can provide evidence or articulation of what's there.
So a suggestion along those lines is we can understand through Vermont School Board Association the other districts that are doing policy governance like this, and see if, because now there's been a few years that different districts have been doing this. It was pretty new for everybody 8, 9, 10 years ago when we started this. And perhaps we can get some input of how other districts are getting at that parental guardian school relationship. That may be something we can put down.
Yeah.
It's always a good, and again, Stuart and I have, since we've been in the policy governance work, Stuart mostly just around a lot of our academic pieces, we've actually done a pretty good job, my words, of scouring kind of the Vermont group and looking at what are other folks doing on these particular monitoring reports. And I would say I wouldn't say we're, most exhaustive, but we're pretty close, to a more detailed actually than what I find a lot of
so
others.
You don't think we'd find out much from
I haven't gone back particularly on this one, but what I have found is like, that doesn't seem to be that complete to me, when I look at others. And I don't know, Stuart, if you would concur.
Yeah, I would, and I haven't looked at this one for a while, when we first were doing the piece, but actually in most school districts, I'm not saying in Vermont, but that have policy governance, this policy was all about discipline and students and parents. You widened the scope when you did this policy to be much more inclusive than just be the answer of, do students get their rights when they are disciplined? So I think in a lot of ways, and I can't speak to other school districts in the state, that one of the things is this is in a sense a unique policy in terms of really trying to get to the rights of parents and students, not just in terms of the traditional sense of the school, and so I think that's one of the reasons it might be a little harder to examine.
So I put on my to-do list, I will send an email to VSBA and ask them. I mean, I think it's
great.
It can be on board to just see if whether the things are out there on that particular issue.
So I've got a little change on page 3 that will add some additional clarity to that.
The other question I would have, David, is on page 7. Is the suggestion box still an effective mechanism?
I think it is. I think it allows for, folks to exercise that option. I don't believe it's used as much as walk-ins and telephone calls. I think we've been much more, I think people feel like, my words, we're approachable, and the staff that surround me, I think, are really approachable. So and I think they're approachable to you, and often you're sending them our way, and that's probably more, I think we've seen that kind of uptick over the years. But this still remains, I think, an important component to, providing some evidence to that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have just one comment on detail policy number 5. And I think the evidence is sufficient, but the second item, a variety of information is available on the district website. I've gotten various comments that that's not always the case. I mean, yeah, maybe it's a variety, but it's often not the information one is looking for. I know that we do have, did we end up in the budget with some money for, okay, so that would be starting in July or whatever. But yeah, so I'm just pointing that out, that definitely is something I think that needs work as far as getting information out to parents, so.
So our district.
I don't think anything has to change in this, because I still think you're in compliance, but.
It's an area that could be improved. It
certainly could be improved in that particular.
Great.
So
Any further comments?
I'm wondering if we can vote and go through this and make, because the only change is that one change, and if we can vote on that with the understanding that that one sentence is going to be
Well,
modified,
our
or do you want it
practice
to
has
be-
been, this is the third review of this?
This was not, I don't believe this was third, but it is warned for action. You can bring back on the 20th with that one, with one piece.
I think our practice has been to make the changes and then go through. So if I understand it might not be material, but
Fair
we're
enough.
going to follow our past practice. I would probably put it on the.
Consistency is always good, but you know what else they say about consistency?
All right, you've got enough
Yep.
correction on that?
Yep, very good. They're here now, so.
All right, we will go back to agenda item 8.
So, on the agenda, we have a report from ATC regarding sound testing at the Chamberlain School, and then the second bullet is about some committee work and update. But here to join us are folks from ATC. I know Tom Broido is here. John Stewart, as you know, who's been working with me on master planning, is also here, and I want to say Rob, and so is also here. So, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you just to come up and put 3 seats here. There are 2 chairs here for you. Actually, there's 2. Give you a little bit of taking space. And this mic is on. Okay. So, welcome, Tom, and welcome, Rob. The board has recently received the ATC report. It has not yet been out to the public. I don't know, we have some copies, is that true? No, John, we don't have copies available for the public at the moment, do we? We do have the master planning and vision books that have that in the tab, so if people would like to look on, you certainly could do that. So Meg actually has a box of our master planning and vision, so actually, we just want the books back. This will be posted up on our website, you know, at some point tomorrow. This in the tab 4, I believe, in the master planning and visioning book. It's in there, so.
David, I think there was a handout of the findings and conclusions off to the side.
Yes, that is at their place, Tom, thanks. It's under tab 4 in that master planning and visioning book. It's a big book for some of you just want to look at that report, but I think it provides some helpful information. So Tom and Rob, thanks for being here. We have a good amount of time. We were a little ahead of ourselves tonight, so the board is extremely efficient, so we're circled back. So again, welcome.
Thank you. So as David said, my name's Tom Broido, and I'm the branch manager of the local office of ATC Group Services. And I was responsible for the overall performance of the study. And Rob Montgomery is our senior project manager, and he designed and managed the study. And then we're expecting our staff scientist, Devin Porter, to be here at about 7:45. So he was the one who was on site, did the work, and assisted with the technical aspects of the work. And I'm going to turn it over to Rob to go over the process and the findings and conclusions, and then we'll just open it up for questions.
So before we get into the findings and conclusions, the process, a bit of a background there. We were contracted by the school district to perform a baseline noise survey of existing conditions with F-16s present at the airport. Our survey included ambient noise monitoring in 1 outdoor location as well as 2 indoor locations on 3 separate dates. Also during those 3 days, we conducted personal noise exposure monitoring of 5 employees over the course of those 3 days. Our results were compared to what we've used as an acronym, the FEIS report, which is short for, forgive me while I find it, the United States Air Force F-35A Operational Basing Final Environmental Impact Statement. It was conducted in September 2013. It was a presentation of model data. So our role was to come in and put actual numbers to those scenarios. Our findings and conclusions here. First 2 bullets are based on what's called DNL, which is a day-night sound level average. For all locations during all sampling events, our DNLs were below the 70 decibel A-weighted scale baseline level presented in the FEIS report. Our DNLs for all locations during all sampling events exceeded both the indoor and outdoor FICON thresholds. Third bullet point, the measured 8-hour equivalent noise levels, that's the noise experienced from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., representing a school day. For all locations during all sampling events, those measurements were below the 74 decibel A-weighted scale baseline level presented in the FEIS report. The next two bullets are focused on events, actual aircraft noise events. The first bullet, observed aircraft noise events in excess of 75 decibels on the A-weighted scale were higher than the baseline level presented in the FEIS report. Observed aircraft noise events in excess of 65 decibels were similar to those presented in the baseline report. And then lastly, the last bullet is speaking to employee exposures to noise. All measured employee noise exposures were below both the permissible exposure limit and the action limit presented by VOSHA. Any questions?
Just a couple clarifying questions before we get into sort of deeper questions. So bullet number 4 and number 5, does that mean that the number of observed aircraft noise events in excess of those two thresholds, well, I guess the first one was higher, that's the number was higher, the number of events, as opposed to the loudness of those events or the noise associated with those events?
The number of events in excess of that
Okay.
noise level.
Okay.
Yep.
So
Okay.
can I clarify that? So it's frequency level of events.
Right.
That's what you were
That's what I'm
asking.
understanding.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I'm asking, yep. Go ahead, Alex.
Well, my question is, how many? How many were there?
So that's
Page 5.
It's in the
page
report.
5, table
Yeah,
2.
Oh,
it's in
excuse me.
the, it's in this deeper
Thank you.
report,
Never mind.
yeah.
I'll check
yeah,
that out
yeah.
later.
Table 3, page 6.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Pages are on the top right corner, not the bottom ones. I didn't read the FEIS.
Five events with the windows closed and 25 events with the windows open, right?
Can you define an event? I'm noticing on that second paragraph, it says for room 19, 21 to 26 events, and room 13 had 22 to 37 events, and then there's clarification about not all those aircraft.
I think it's in there somewhere. Basically, it was any, when you're looking at the results in the software that we used, there's a graphical representation of the noise level, including the LMAX value. And, you know, just set a guideline at 65 or 75, and any period of time for which the LMAX value exceeded that threshold counted as one event. So an event could range from, you know, a second or less than a second to minutes to, you know, in the case of recess, occasionally a long time.
Hold on here. Oh, it says aircraft noise events.
No.
No.
That's just
That's an
specific
important
to bold.
component, right?
That's
So
an
these are
important
events.
distinction, yeah. So an aircraft noise event is any event, like I just described, during which I was able to observe an aircraft passing overhead or hear on, you know, from, you know, air traffic control that there was a flight taking off or landing at that time. So it's an estimate.
So if you look on page 6, at the end of that section, end of section 3.1 in bold, is where we have the caveat regarding that, in that Devin was on site, and he had air traffic control, and he had his observations of flights, and recorded those. Then got back and looked at the data, and if there was a peak over 75 or over 65, when a aircraft was overhead based on those two methods, it counted. That doesn't rule out that there was also community noise going on at that same time.
Right. So there was definitely aircraft noise, but it may have also been added on to that would be other noise like recess.
Yes.
Fire truck.
Or a truck going by.
Yep.
Or any event like that.
And the corollary being that in some of the longer events, you could have had multiple aircraft taking off, but it only counts as one event because there was other noise in between that kind of made the peaks run together.
And maintain itself above the threshold, if you will.
Yeah.
What kind of aircraft? What type? Any aircraft?
Any aircraft at all. Yeah, helicopters, single seat, single engine, right up to you know, the biggest commercial flights that would take off, and F-16s.
And I think you mentioned you had not only the flight schedules from Burlington International and generally the Air Guard, and you had access to the tower. Is that, or that's you're listening to?
There's a public
actual flights if they were varying from the schedule.
Yes. So there's a public feed, you know, available of the air traffic control channels, you know, for arrival and departure and ground transit. And I was able to listen to those, and you know, sometimes they'd say, okay, such and such flight cleared for departure, and I'd look out the window and there it goes.
Yeah.
You know, other times I wasn't able to see it or hear it, but I did hear it on the radio, and vice versa.
I have a question about the FICON thresholds. So we were sort of above the FICON thresholds, and John Stewart shared with me, you know, the sort of FICON committee report. I have to say it's quite technical, and I guess my question is, as more of a layman's question, about how people use those FICON thresholds when they're estimating, you know, sound and appropriate levels of sound. Because it seems like we're kind of under the FEIS in most cases, but we're above those FICON thresholds. So I guess the two questions are sort of how far above those FICON thresholds does this represent, and how do people use those thresholds when they're making decisions about, you know, appropriateness of buildings and locations and that kind of thing?
So first off, just so everyone's aware, if you do have the full report, in Appendix A, there is a glossary that tells you what FICON stands for, and then I'm going to let Rob explain the history of the FICON report, and then we, page 11, right, bottom of page 11 is the FICON report from 91. So why don't you just give a little background on what that is?
So the FICON report was drafted in 1992, and it was created to review federal policies that govern assessment of airport noise impacts. The specific reference that we used from FICON was Table 3.1 in their report. Table 3.1 is generated by what's in the in our world, if you will, we call the levels document. It was created by the EPA in 1974 as a result of Congress passing the Noise Control Act in 1972. Essentially, they said, okay, EPA, you need to develop a criteria, okay, that is going to, you're going to publish information on levels of environmental noise in defined areas under various conditions that are requisite to protect the public health and welfare. The EPA is quick to point out in the foreword of their document that they were required to do this by the Noise Control Act, and it does not constitute regulations or standards. So it's guidance. So the way people would use it would be as a guidance document in a non-regulatory sense.
And if you want to see the results in the report, well, we said it was greater than, if you go to table 1
Yep.
and look at the right-hand column, which is LDN, page 4, table 1, right-hand column. That's exterior, right? And where are we here? We're comparing to the exterior? No, it's this one here.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Or interior?
Or both.
Or both, yeah.
Yeah.
Indoor, outdoor.
Right.
So the outdoor level is 55, and you can see the exterior levels are 62, 61, 62, and the interior levels, FICON, are 45, and then you can see the interior levels in the report. So FICON is a non-regulatory level. Levels for, there are various levels for sound. Your question about how are these used. This is the reference that was referenced in the FEIS, which is one reason why we chose it. And you may find people that use a different reference value because it is that type of field. And then, your next question, I think, that we is related to, what does that mean? And, what we're going to do is defer to others as far as what that means for educational impacts. That's outside of our area of expertise.
So I guess one of the things, this is a lot of technical information to absorb, and I know that you're deferring to other educational experts, but in terms of this assessment of the Chamberlain facility, again, from a layperson standpoint, the two questions I have are really around, was there anything in the findings and conclusions that you would say to us as your client were alarming relative to an environment that we have employees and children at on a 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? And then the flip side would be, has your experience been that noise mitigation efforts would really calm some of the, a high percentage of the events that might be at the higher level here by any measure?
So a couple of responses to that. These results did not surprise us, and there wasn't anything that jumped out. And remember, the purpose was to establish a baseline and compare it to the FEIS. But we did look at, with the FICON level, we said, boy, I wonder if that's even achievable. So we went to some noise monitoring that we had done in other schools. And we did see that it was a middle school.
Yep.
And the levels were close to that interior 45 level. And so, it's not a lot of data points, obviously, and it's a middle school, not an elementary school, and there's different activities and different age groups. But that level is, achievable. Was there a third part of your question? The
mitigation.
The mitigation. Right. So the mitigation, and we talked with John about that the other day, and again, we're not acoustical engineers from the standpoint of designing decreases in how effective the mitigations can be. So we're going to defer on that one too.
It sounds like, Holly, we have quantified the Chamberlain pause here.
Oh, there was one other thing. There was one other thing. You asked about employees.
Yes.
The data clearly shows that employees are less than the regulatory VOSHA, Vermont Occupational Safety and Health Administration, requirements.
Thank you. Martin?
So I just want to understand on the page for the what exactly the LAF max is? Is that essentially the peak noise? Is that kind of what that means, just in layman's term?
Instantaneous peak noise.
Right. And presumably, are there studies about the impact of LAF max type numbers like these and their impact? I mean, again, that might not be your expertise, but I'm just wondering if there are those kind of studies out there that would, you know, say if somebody is exposed to several instances of 106.9 LAF max, is that going to have health effects?
So as far as, you know, that issue and health and safety, the OSHA has chosen to use a time-weighted average, not any one peak.
Right.
So an 8-hour level. So that's what we're comparing it to.
No, I understand that OSHA
Right.
does the day-night level.
OSHA does the 8 hours, so.
Or the, and the 8 hour, right, right.
It gets
and the 8
confusing
hour,
because
right.
there's so many different, there's a day-night average, there's a day number, there's a night number, there's a 24-hour number, there's
Right.
a peak number, there's an 8-hour time-weighted average for the employee number, so there's lots of different numbers floating around here, and it gets very confusing. So the OSHA number is an 8-hour time-weighted average measured right by the employee's ear.
So I guess I would still ask if you know of any studies or where we might look for studies about the high intensity, very
Short, high intensity. You know,
and
we
yeah,
would need to look into that. I have not prepared anything on that.
Right. Because, well, I mean, I just think about, I often think about hunting when I'm sitting here trying to go and get through these. No, I'm just kidding. And you know, when you shoot the rifle, that's a high impact, and that can have damage. Or you shoot the shotgun several times when you're duck hunting. So it would seem like there'd be some sort of data out there, but I don't know what the decibel level of my shotgun is.
It's 165.
Is it?
12-gauge shotgun.
Oh, there we go. I do use ear protection, by the way.
But I guess that's a good point. I mean, of the highest measured, and maybe is that LMAX? Then the highest measured sound, or LMAX, is what? And in comparison to what we know about, and again, I handed out, actually Bridget and Alex don't have this, just a pretty simplistic sound bar measurement. I don't think I have enough copies to go around, but basically it just has kind of from, you know, if you're at 85, as Elizabeth just alluded to, you know, there was at 135 or 165 was a
So the
shotgun.
highest measured was 107.
Right, which
and,
puts
111, there you go. And in your glossary, I might defer to Devin to explain this with the, that decibel is a logarithmic measurement. So therefore, 160 is not twice as loud as 80. It's many times louder than 80. And there's a description of that on page 11.
Yeah.
So the last line on page 11 under dB, for most people, an increase of 10 decibels corresponds to a doubling of perceived noise intensity. So from 85 to 95, 95 is perceived as twice as loud. So 165 is many times louder than 111.
Do you know what the peaks are attributed to? What was that?
It varies, you know, for some cases, those, you know, in a couple cases at least, those, you know, LAF max values were close in time to an aircraft event. In other cases, they were not.
What's the time frame for day and night?
Day is 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., night is 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. The school day was 8 to 4.
How noisy it is
And if you're really curious, you can look at the graphs in the back and see, you can watch as things get quieter through the evening and then pick back up in the morning, yeah.
We've always talked about Chamberlain, as Holly has alluded to, it's been the kind of the Chamberlain pause, or I don't know, nuisance, I guess. And so it feels like there's some validation to that. The numbers don't reach levels of significant concern, but yet it points out that there are times that are create what we would say a pause. When we look at the total overall, when you look at that measurement, and I get the compounding of the equation of sound, but when you look at kind of that level sustained, a lot of those are shorter periods of time which have diminished effects. So again, you're right, there's a lot of data in here, and there's a lot of terminology in here, which is hard to get through. Our goal, of course, as Tom said, was to establish baseline noise. And to be really clear, we were looking at how we could appropriately articulate and measure that over time. For us, it's been our proximity to the airport, but it's been a noise issue, and we've had it on our particular radar probably since 2014, 13 or 14, although it's been on, I would say, radar probably isn't the right thing with being close to the airport, but being on our kind of our concern list, it's been around for probably a good solid 20 years or more. So this is our first step to do that. One of the things I would say to the board is it does seem that there's some high level of comparability to the FEIS study on the DNL contours. And I don't know if you could comment on that. There seemed to be some consistencies that emerged.
The FEIS said that the school was in the 70 to 74 DNL contour with a predicted number of 70, and we were very close to that. So it appears that study, based on this data, accurately predicted, because they didn't measure at the school, but they used other measurements to model what would be at the school, and it looks like that was accurate. Where it also, our study confirmed the number of events in excess of 65 were very similar to the FEIS. The one place where we showed a difference was the number of events in excess of 75 dBA.
Is there anything that happens kind of periodically between about noon and 2? Seems like a lot of those
hours. I don't think everybody heard the question.
I was just wondering, I didn't know if there were F-16 operations that tended to happen, but I was actually wondering about that. Or are people 11 to 1? Yeah, because it's like if you look at where the spikes are, they all seem to occur within about a 1.5 hour time period between about noon and 2. So.
And on the days we were there, the Air Guard was operating, taking off at about 1 o'clock.
Okay.
So there was that contribution as well.
All right.
And one of the recess monitors was wearing.
Yeah, so when you scan through these graphs, there's both the outside samples, the inside samples, and the personal samples. So you need to look at the headers carefully to know which graph you're looking at.
Tom, we had a couple questions. One, and you can answer this, the F-35's data we don't have, so we simply have a baseline, correct? I mean, there's no way to say it's projected here and we compare. It's not something you can do.
That's correct. That wasn't the purpose of the work.
And the other thing, we have a number of questions we've talked about, and some of these we're going to have to regroup and figure out how to get answers that you can't provide. But another one was, if more houses are destroyed between the school and the airfield, how does that affect noise?
So, yeah, so again, intuitively, there's a few things that that could happen in that situation. You know, one is the noise from the demolition, and we've done monitoring from demolition projects, and there's concern about noise from there, and there's different techniques that they use to take down buildings. So there's the noise from the actual work, and there would be some impact from that. How great it is, you know, depends on how far away it is and what techniques are used. And then the other piece of that question is, after those houses are removed, that there's less screening, if you will, from the airport. And again, that could be, we can't answer what the impacts would be. That could be modeled, and or it can be measured, but that, again, was outside the scope of what we did.
I think a lot of people in the community would be very interested to know what were the causes of the particular spikes. Were they, you know, fire truck, airplane taking off, and once we've determined it's an airplane taking off, what kind of airplane? And I understand about constructive interference with sound waves. So if a fire truck is driving by during recess and an F-16 takes off, that's going to be a huge spike. So if those sorts of details were easily forthcoming, I think that would be information that people would be very interested in. And I also want to comment that just because these noise levels are below a certain level does not mean that education at Chamberlain is not being impacted, because if you have something called a Chamberlain pause, you know, that's a problem right there. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Unless there's any other questions, anything from the public, any additional questions? Good. And I think then, David, to reiterate, our goal was working with you folks, and thank you for this hard work, to establish that baseline. And I think the 4.0, the findings and conclusions, along with some of the open questions that we'll have to figure out how to respond to some of those or get access to the data, I think this has met our goal of establishing that baseline. And I know I'm encouraged that for the most part, the modeling and the actual testing are fairly in line. And it looks like there's a couple of areas that relative to incidence level at certain decibel levels, that seems to be the fundamental issue. And then we need to really respond to the noise mitigation efforts as well. Is that a fair summary?
Fair.
Martin.
In addition to establishing a baseline, we did want to see if there were any, you know, significant red flags right now that would lead us to have to do something, whatever is going to happen down the road. And from this report, I can't tell that there is. Nothing seems to leap out, but there's obviously some things that we need to find out a little bit more information to work into the mitigation efforts, but also to understand, you know, are we still doing a disservice, even though this doesn't jump out and say, yeah, you got to get out of there. It doesn't. So we'll have to plan that out. I guess through the subcommittee process, we can take those next steps to try to figure out some of those things.
And I'm sure this data is going to be of interest to your mitigation consultant to have some numbers to work off of instead of just guessing.
Yeah, again, our hope is currently we're pushing to get the soundproofing through the FAA, and there's particular processes that they go through around the evaluation of the current data that's collected. I can't say that they would use this data. My hope would be they would, to validate. And to answer the questions that came up earlier, Bridget, would be, if we do this soundproofing, does it significantly improve, you know, the conditions to the point where it takes away what we would call the Chamberlain academic, you know, the pause. And if that can be the case, then I think it's important for us to consider that. Just a quick update on that particular piece. I've heard nothing. Again, I've been pretty consistent about my correspondence with them, including our Vermont DC delegation. You know, I'm hopeful that we'll hear something back soon. Again, for us, as I said earlier, it's been about how can we enhance that particular property and diminish the kind of the noise interference at Chamberlain School. So it's our hope that that can happen soon. And whether it's homes that are being taken down into the future or other events that are occurring, or aircraft activity that continues, then it's going to be a better environment at the Chamberlain School. So I think this is helpful. There's still a lot of, a lot more questions that we have. Again, it's not an easy read, to get through all of the definitions and terminology. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to agenda item 13, setting the agenda for the June 20th meeting. Or was there any committee work update?
Yeah,
sorry.
Sorry, that was
yeah, sorry, committee work update.
So the only thing I wanted to allude to is the subcommittee and myself, that is Bridget, Martin, John Stewart, and myself have been working on the continued evolution of our master planning and visioning process. And we developed the rubric to be more comprehensive. And so we added subcomponents underneath, i.e. enrollment and physical condition, building, etc. That's by your place, I believe. I don't want to spend an exorbitant amount of time on here, but when you look at a quick look of that, you kind of get that quick summary of where are the big kind of categories that may have concern. And we are going to continue to populate this now that we have some of the sound information. In preparation for the June 20th meeting, my plan is to have that populated for a review. At the same time, I'm going to start to be rolling out some recommendations and next step suggestions around those options, to move forward. Anything else, Martin or Bridget, that the only other thing I'll add is, although it's not in this packet, because the packet the threshold analysis will then go into deeper components of evidence around enrollment, and we'll give you information in tables, but it will also explain why it received the ranking of a 1 or a 0, 1, or 3 to provide. Because in some cases, if enrollment's going way down, it might get a condition code of 1 or 3. Or if it's going way up, it might get a condition code of 0, 1, or 3, etc. And we're still working on making sure it's consistent. Because that's also the hard part. If we called this a 1 at Chamberlain, should it be consistent with one of the other schools as well? So anyway, that's where we are with the kind of a committee update. I don't know if board members have any particular thoughts, ideas that you could provide us before we continue our work.
I did think the revision on this was helpful in terms of highlighting kind of more critical areas. I can't, I'm assuming the subcommittee is doing that more qualitative analysis, but this helped me sort of go right to, okay, these would be the hot spot areas. Yeah. So,
the only one caution with that is that the condition codes of 0, 1, and 3. So when you see a sub-tally of 7, right, that doesn't mean that it's way over the threshold. It's really a cumulative review of a concern by a category. So.
Well,
or a school.
Yeah, and to me, it was just a helpful way to force rank in some way. Yeah.
Thanks.
Right, now we'll move on to setting the agenda for June 20th.
So, continued, we probably can put action over 9, right? For that.
I'm sorry, before we leave this item, David, I think you may have just said this, but do you have any initial impressions based on what we just reviewed? Because we still have an asterisk here, I believe, for the noise condition at Chamberlain. I don't know, I mean, I guess my own sense is it's not a 3, you know.
Right, I'm a little bit guarded in that
Sure.
area. I don't think it's a 0, and I'm not feeling it's a 3, but I need to really, look at that.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but no, I was just
I
curious.
think you're right. Again, I want to really work at that pretty diligently as kind of a big component of the environmental issues at our schools. Actually, when I'm hearing some of this, I often am thinking a little bit about the close proximity of Rick Marcotte to yeah. So for me, it was like, it's like, okay, we've been talking about Chamberlain, and you're talking about, inside, outside noise. Now, like, today I was over at Rick Marcotte, and I'm going, the activity around there, I wonder what that level was. So it adds some additional levels for me, concerns.
Our high peak noise is roughly leaf blower, I'm thinking of my weed whacker out in the yard. I'm sure we replicate that.
That's right. That's right.
And it does beg the question. That's exactly
right. So that's part of, due diligence on my part. Just as I said earlier, like, if we're giving this one a score of this, I don't think I should be absent of noise at these other schools or those physical conditions. So I need to, and again, for those of you who've been at the high school, I don't know, Patrick, how many times does the fire engine pull out of the parking lot across the street?
My brother, who's the district attorney in Brooklyn, often asks me, which one of us is working in the city?
So, that's kind of what came to my mind when I'm hearing that.
They moved PD to Gregory Drive.
Thanks, Steve, though, glad you asked that.
All right, now the June 20th meeting. So we will put 2.1 for action.
Mm-hmm.
Martin, did you want to bring up the VSBA resolutions?
Yeah, I need to find the exact due date for when we have to propose them, but I think we need to start the discussion on what resolutions we might want to propose. It's in the August timeframe that there's a committee that takes up the resolutions at the VSBA, Vermont School Board Association. The resolutions are primarily giving guidance to that organization as far as for its advocacy efforts at the Agency of Education, at the legislature, et cetera. I would suggest in preparation for the next meeting that folks look at the current resolutions that are on the book, essentially. One can find that very easily on the VSBA, vtvsba.org website. It's quite easy to find. And see if there are any ideas, anything that we would want to propose. That might be one place regarding tobacco products. I don't recall if there's a resolution or not, but so I know there's some things already on there that we've pushed regarding collective bargaining, regarding health insurance, et cetera. So I would put VSBA resolutions discussion for the next meeting, and we'll have to determine if it'll be early enough in that first August meeting to take action on any of those. Probably will. I don't think we'll have to have it taken up on that July 11th meeting. But I will double check that, obviously, in the...
I don't know where to, maybe just under my report, but a legislative update respective to education funding. If we don't have anything, I think it's important. We're well into the end of the year, and we're soon to start talking about budget, and it'd be nice to know where that's
would be nice.
at. Yeah. So I can put that under my report. I don't know if there's any other legislative conversations that might be.
I think that's the main one. We may want to certainly at some point understand a little better the special education bill.
Block grant. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I could review that, but I'd prefer to actually hear what you all think it says, in case it needs to be modified next biennium.
Yep.
Anything else for June 20th?
So the one thing I will I think I've been bringing this up for a while, I'll bring it up again. The policy for school press, that I don't think we have it on the future agenda items, but I do want to see that as soon as we can. And I can't recall, I know that Delina was looking into it. I can't recall where she was as far as looking at the model policy from the VSBA. But I think it is one that we need to take up.
And specifically, can you give me a little more?
It's essentially freedom of the press policy for school publications.
That was in our future agenda items, but I'm not seeing it there.
It's the one, David, that Karen was doing some research with the attorneys about.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll see what we have on that. I don't know where we are.
Well, at a minimum, let's put it on the future agenda items.
All right. Any additional items or items that can be taken off on agenda item 14? All right, we'll move to consider and approve the minutes of May 16th and 17th. Any changes to those?
Can we go back to the future agenda items really
ahead.
quick? I was reminded by somebody who actually watched the meeting, last meeting. We talked about how to run effective public hearings, and I think there was some confusion, I think, on my part, as far as what we meant by that. I think that is related to the offer that we had from the restorative justice folks as far as how to deal with some of the controversial issues and whether we wanted to bring Lisa Bettinger, did I get that? Yeah, Benninger, sorry, whether to bring her in to discuss that. That's why that got put on there originally.
It was exclusive to the restorative justice practice, but
well, it was not. It wasn't that. I mean, that's where Lisa comes from. That environment. It was more public hearings when we have a controversial type issue, and giving us some feedback on some methods for perhaps handling that. I mean, it can be whatever we want, but that's why we originally put that on there. So, whatever that's worth.
Is there a specific interest in maybe inviting her to start with?
Sure.
Yeah.
So maybe we.
I might recommend you start with, School Boards Association recommendation, and maybe there's an opportunity for them to provide you with either in writing and or come and talk about it.
Well, and we had also, we had talked, this one was broader to me than kind of controversial topics potentially. It was really expectations of like Robert's Rules of Orders and things like that, almost for board training. So I thought it was broader than what you mentioned, Martin.
When you get into hearings, effective running of public meetings, then when you get into a hearing, you can have student-related hearings, you can have other, there's different, some of you have been through some of those things. It's not bad to review what you might do. We can, I was thinking it would be, what types of public hearings would you have? How would you set them up? What's the kind of the decision-making? How do you solicit feedback,
So, I mean, I think that it coincides with, for instance, the master planning and visioning, making sure we're effectively running meetings with respect to that. And that will be certainly controversial, presumably. Or if we have to do redistricting, or any number of issues that may come up.
I think it's,
so.
Let's get some information. Do you have a desire to move it up?
Not necessarily, I mean, but as long as.
Maybe you and I can talk about framing that one for a future meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, the minutes of May 16th. Any comments or changes to that?
I had a couple typos on both of them that I'll just give to Meg, not anything substantive.
Okay.
Any comments or changes to the May 17th meeting? Seeing none with those typos, they are approved. We'll move on to consider and approve the documents from the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank related to bond issuance. And this is warned for action.
Yes, it's in your packet. Resolution and certificate, general obligation bond. And the amount is not easy to find, but it's at the very second to the last paragraph, where it speaks specifically to the $950,500. And I don't know if you have particular questions.
They're about dates, though, because the dates on all of these, some of them look like they were meant to be dated July 1st, to sort of coincide, but some of them are dated July 12th, some are dated July 1st, and then the very first document is dated June. So I was just confused about what the protocol was supposed to be in terms of, are we supposed to be signing these now so that they're ready for July 1st, or you would know, yeah. Steve should know all these answers.
July 1st often is an interest accrual date or a coupon date, and July 12th would be the date that the actual bonds close and the money changes hands. It's probably.
I've been advised not to date any of these forms, but to simply have the board and officers sign where appropriate, just in case the closing gets moved.
Okay.
This is not yet closed yet, and I would like, if possible, to get this signed tonight if we can. But I would soft pedal any dating compulsion. So,
what do we
and this was created, I will say, by our bond attorney. This guy works for us, so he has, made this as, as customer centric as he can. But this whole business is very arcane, and you really don't have much flexibility in any of this stuff if you want to make it saleable on the worldwide bond market.
Well, I guess the form that's in here, unless it's different than what's in here, this is saying we're signing this on the 12th of July.
I think that's intended to reflect the intended closing date. And as a practical matter, we can't sign it on that date because they're in Boston at an attorney's office or something, but they would like it to be effective as of that date.
Could we reword it so that says we, set our hands on behalf of the municipality on whatever date with intended closing of July 12th?
I would really, we could put this off for 2 weeks, but I'd really rather not make any changes to the text of this at all, that you're going to potentially cause issues. This has to be returned to the bond bank by the 25th, so if you really want an opinion on that, we do have time to get it, but.
The board signing in a different place than where the treasurer, who's dated, it's where it's dated July 12th, and on one component.
Well, that's one component, but the
prior, yeah,
is all or majority of the board and the treasurer.
Right. Well, I think maybe you make note that you're signing something that has a date that's different, and if we look into make sure that, if we need to date it differently, we will do so if you make that motion. I don't want you to be feeling like you're signing something that's not appropriate. We're being advised by the bond attorney to sign the document.
I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution certificate with dates amended as needed.
Nice.
Second.
Further discussion? So we would postpone signing until dates become amended?
No, just if, there needs to be a change, if they slip the pricing by a week, that this is still effective.
Well, I'm struggling with putting my signature on something that says I signed it on the 12th of July.
How would it work if we signed it and dated our own signatures?
That's probably fine. Right, that's a good idea.
Acceptable?
John, any ideas, or Steve?
Let's see.
I mean, you're signing your name and you're putting the date when you signed it. It doesn't mean that then the document is still has the effective dates, I suppose, that could be
The
needed.
detailed instructions I've been given say resolution and certificate. This should be signed by all or a majority of the legislative body, and the date of the regular special meeting entered where indicated on the last page, so today's date. Municipal clerk and municipal treasurer should sign where indicated, and the municipal seal affixed over the clerk's signature.
I mean, I don't know if there are any lawyers in the room, but it's often the case that, if you have to collect a bunch of signatures and counterparts, the attorneys will hold them in escrow until the closing and then stamp them, so make them basically effective. But I think there's an allowance for the logistics of having to do things like this, so.
I guess that's consistent.
Unless you all want to go down to Boston for the closing,
Sure. So I guess I would recommend that you're having a conversation about it here, concerned around dates if they need to be amended as such. You're making your point concerned specific to the document. It would seem like I'd recommend you approve it as is, and so note it, the concerns around the date.
I have no problem signing this as is.
And I will likely put today's date on it.
No, beside where you sign.
Right. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to the consent agenda.
So there's a lot going on here in the consent agenda, if I may, just for a quick second. All hires are important. These are hires, and I also have a corresponding information sheet about each of the staff members there being hired. So some are being rehired. There are new, I would just pull off one of those, and David Hyatt, who is the 1.0 assistant principal at Frederick H. Tuttle. And so, again, an important hire to the middle school. Obviously, all of them are important. I just wanted to highlight a couple of there's been a lot of committee work going on. Some of you have been part of some of those committees, and I really appreciate your efforts in that. Bridget, thank you for all your work. So anyway, we're moving along quite well. We're happy to have a budget much earlier than we did last year. So,
could I pull the library furniture and the school photography off, just for separate discussion? Any other questions on hires or the lease interest rates for bus and camera system? Okay. That does not require formal action, so by consensus, those are approved.
Thank you.
And my quick comments on those two is it was...
on the hires?
No, on the two bids.
Okay.
Is it okay to move on to those? Was that we did not accept the low bid, and I know we've had this discussion before, but I would just note that there seems to be different rationale when we get these and the low bid is not accepted. And there's a level of non-standardization on the photography bid in particular, that I know we've had this discussion before, but I think it went out to bid with the intent to award this to one bidder, but I think this is the second or third year that it's been awarded to more than one bidder, and I just wanted to see what the expectations were there, and then also the rationale for not going with the low bidder on the furniture for the library renovation.
So the photography, let me just talk about the photography bid first. Ideally, the interest on the district side would be to have one photographer for the entire district, so that we could streamline things like how we enter them into our student information system, you know, sense of ease in that regard, and get the best possible price. That remains an important component, but it's not the sole most important piece. What I have as an overall objective of school photography is that we can get photos of our students to parents, guardians, relatives, neighbors, etc., at the most affordable price we can, while at the same time making sure that the individuals that are taking those pictures have capacity and have the right connection with our schools. So in some cases, we've had folks that, you know, have a long history with some of those schools. Having one sometimes is difficult because they often overlap school photography periods. So if you only have one, the capacity for some of those folks gets difficult. So one is best service and best price. I've been really clear about trying to limit the kickback dollars that might go towards a school or back to a PTO. I'd rather see it be put towards a lower cost, and so there's been that's been working. And then I also leave it up to those folks to do that.
Is that information in the bid that PTOs might be getting some?
No, so I've been really clear
vendors?
that we don't want that. We're looking at, in the bid process, we're looking at the best possible price that you can provide us.
So none of these bids included
Correct.
a donation to
That's
PTO?
right. That's right. In the past, you'd see, you know, different packets that would come to us because, you know, they're trying to obviously make some money and give us some money. I didn't want money coming back to us. I wanted to get the best possible price. But there's also relationships that happen with some of the photographers and the families and the students. That's also a component. So that was the reason that they're not all the same.
So did all of these vendors meet our specifications?
I believe they did, yes. I believe those did.
So I guess the fundamental question I have, if one of the overriding factors you're talking about, David, is affordability for families, if the vendor met the specification, why would we not go with the low vendor?
Because part of it was also, you know, the relationship and the quality of some of the product that comes out. Yeah. So some of the product is a little different from what's delivered. And so it's not just apples to apples here. Even though we asked for, you know, the 8x10, some of the 8x10s look different from different companies. So that's so noted by parents and staff. And then there's some important.
Is that not in the specification then?
Well, I don't know. It's just that it's been the common deliverable. What comes back to us, you know, the quality is just a little bit different. I don't know, again, I have both Mark and Holly here, so thanks for being here. You guys can talk a little bit to the photography process. It's an important piece of celebrating children's evolution, and it's cost, quality, flexibility, workability, meeting our timelines that are, I think.
We have a lot of volunteer PTO members who have made their selection in good faith. So,
yeah,
we're talking about $1.73 over 200 students. So it's kind of already past my bandwidth.
Say that again, Steve.
I just said it's, you know, it seems like quibbling over very, very small dollar amounts.
Yeah,
well, I think that, well, but if you're looking between Beltrami and AMV, for example, yes,
Right.
but AMV versus Life Touch, for example. And I'm taking off my board hat for 2 seconds just to say, as a parent, the quality of AMV is just extremely high, and Beltrami as well. I mean, I've had both photos, personal photos done by Beltrami and AMV, and as we've heard, the PTOs put a lot of time and effort before we took over the process and kind of centralized it. There was a lot of energy around this at all the elementary schools about them choosing their own vendors and going through a very big process and assessing the quality of it. And there's a really big difference in quality of the photos, and so it's hard because you can't just sort of specify what that quality is. It's hard to specify the quality in a bid process.
It probably is,
Yeah.
you know, if I really want to get into the pixel ratios and all of that, and maybe we need to, but there's a big component of this that's also, you know, as I said, you know, availability, workability, relationships, quality, affordability. And I never was keen on having money come back into our PTOs. And again, I've said to the PTOs, if they needed something additional money, then I would figure out a way to do it. But I didn't want to have package prices going up, you know, so that we got more kickback, which I believe correlates to the parents or guardians saying, well, we won't get this packet, we'll get this packet, which has these tiny pictures, and we won't give them out as much. I really think it's important that we are able to celebrate our kids and allow our pictures to go to different households, to a mom and guardians and dad's intent, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I think from my perspective, I'm asking really around the integrity of our bidding process. Because if there are specifications that, for instance, if somebody was affiliated with this LifeTouch and came back and said, why did I not get this? And quality wasn't specified, or something that could have been specified, that they would understand why they did not get the business. I think that's an important part of the bidding process. And if there's, you know, vagaries that aren't spelled out in the specifications, like, you know, a parent survey or something to that effect, or the number of photos in the package, I think part of that feedback to vendors, we struggle a lot sometimes getting people to bid on school business, and I wonder sometimes if it's because some vendors, and this is a small example, but don't get specific enough feedback to respond to district needs. So that's really where my questions are coming from.
Mark or Holly, did you guys want to add anything to the photography conversation, or are you good?
Another thing I was going to say is, I don't want to specify, but like sometimes you get like some companies, old school, and you'll have the like laser lights behind the picture, or you know what I mean. And I'll say lately the people that we've been going with are just really working on that quality, ensuring a good shot. The majority are outside with the nice background. Very few come back. I mean, ridiculously few. And I think that's a piece of this also. I'm just giving my feedback to Dr. Staff works with the year. What's your take on why? Pardon me?
Do you know why they don't come back?
The quality of the photos. Every day the photographer is taking his or her time, getting it right, or waiting to get the right photo, looking at the digital copy to see, okay, the eyes were open.
Yeah.
Right? And in past photographers, click, going through.
I think there's a natural, so I understand what you're saying, Elizabeth, and I think there's I don't know how many years ago, you guys can help me, we started, and I think Bridget alluded to, a much more of an intense conversation that was emerging around the elementary schools around the change, and I think they actually called in some district support to help facilitate a meeting. It just was not comfortable for them. So putting it out to bid was an important component, but I don't disagree with honing in on some of the more clearer language around what our intent is. Fundamentally, our intent was obviously cost, but quality, and workability, availability, et cetera. And those aren't really spelled out in there. So I think we certainly can look at the specifics of the bid. And again, I have not made the specific calls back to those that haven't gotten it. So that's not really fair to you either. I think we've been diligent on giving people the feedback. And I think we've seen as a result, if you looked at the past year, you'd see some of these prices, you know, staying very consistent or even more affordable. So we're getting a better deal. anyway.
And then similarly on the furniture bid, it looks like 3 of these vendors met our specifications, yet we selected or recommending the most expensive vendor, and I'm struggling with just the notion that if our specifications are being met, is there something we're not saying in the specs that doesn't allow us to go with the lowest priced vendor?
Yes.
And if it, but looking at this is if this mason is getting, well, that's a bad example, but, well, no, that's the lower one, of the one that met specifications. If we're not talking about quality in the specifications, I think that's problematic.
Right, so we should add the specifics of the quality of the fabric that we're looking for, quantify the fabric quality. I know there's threads and whatever that can be in there. Maybe we need to be clear about that. But that was it. I think that was a big component of this. It just was not, it met the specification, but it was a low quality fabric, which is going to end up costing us more in the long run because it's going to have to be replaced. The office environments didn't meet the specifications, and then, we get into the others that, the seat back. I don't know, John, can you speak to this at all?
This is another one, like the photography bid, where you simply can't do a straight low price bid. There's customer service concerns and subjective, how good are the pictures concerns. And in this case, they may have met the bid in terms of the configuration of the furniture, but it turns out there's a dozen different styles and qualities of fabrics and the selection of fabrics. And to my way of thinking, there's an ability to work with a vendor. In this case, the librarian spent a lot of time reviewing these proposals, and she definitely got a better feel from Exteris, who's a local outfit, and was willing and is willing to spend a lot of time making sure we get the right product, the right fabrics, the right selections. And there was not the same kind of satisfaction with that customer relationship with the other vendors. So
ideally, we should get better at, being clear in our specifications. I hear where you're coming from. We shouldn't be at this. When we put a bid out, we could ask specifically for the curved seat back, bottom, whatever, and fabric of certain quality. And
well, no, what you're talking about is how long it has to last. You don't have to specify something we don't know about. But
I think from what John's saying is that, also there was some specific, there was a lot of work done by our new librarian at the high school who really was looking at those, which
and feels strongly
might have been, but in a way, if that had been front-loaded in the bid, that might have been more clearer to those providing.
Yeah, I have to say I'm less concerned about these variations because they have such subjective quality that you have to assess, and there's so many different parameters to that quality that it's hard to say until you look at the product that they're offering. I struggled more, frankly, with the one we had 2 weeks ago, which was the switches and, whether we could have specified, we don't want an end-of-life product that's going to, those things are a little bit easier to quantify if it's a piece of technology that's going to function the same way and do the same thing. This is so much harder because it's just so subjective and qualitative as opposed to quantitative.
The difficulty is you never know what a vendor is going to propose. I don't think any of us anticipated that the vendor last time around would propose an end-of-life product, and yet we got one. And at that point, there is always in these bid requests a phrase that says, we reserve the right to accept or reject any or all bids and to make a vendor selection in the best interest of the district. So if somebody gives you a proposal that has something strange in it, like an end-of-life product, you have the full right and responsibility to say, no, I guess we're not interested in that. So it's not a legal kind of a thing, but you can never anticipate what the vendor is going to propose and kind of think of that ahead of time, if you will. It's extremely difficult with some of this stuff.
The budgeted amount that we had associated with the library upgrade, not that should be we should always be looking for the opportunity to save, but it is within the budget that was passed.
All right, any other questions, Martin?
I guess the one, the one question I would, or for going forward, if we're seeing this and feel that this is an issue that's come up more than once, perhaps when we get the, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but I'll raise it. When we get the document regarding the bid recommendations, if we can get the request for proposal as well, so we can just, at least for a little while, so we can start understanding, giving input on, I don't know if that we want to do that or not, but.
Well, I mean,
Do we have a
personally,
dollar threshold
There's
for proposals like this? I mean, really, like, I'm getting maybe $8,000 all in for the Chamberlain bid and probably a little bit more for the others because they're larger schools.
It's definitely
Like,
50,000.
Is it, okay.
Well, no, what is the?
I mean, what, and I'm trying to figure out what the includes price is, but I, you know, I'd be hard pressed to think that this is the type of thing that warrants. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit short about this, but I really think we're spending an awful lot of time on a low dollar proposal.
And I hope you know where I'm coming from, Steve. It's not this in the individual bids, it's the pattern that I believe I've seen of not being able to go with the lower bidder. And some of the subjectivity, the decision-making doesn't seem to be taken into account with the specification process. So I think part of it is getting better at developing specs so that, one, we attract better qualified bidders, but that also we're closer to what we're asking for, and we leave some of that subjectivity out of it.
I guess that's a good question, why we're seeing this particular bid. Do we have to see every single bid, or just the, isn't there?
Well, there's a bid requirements, yeah, they're
Sorry.
over the allotted amount, $50,000.
There's an
Over 50?
expectation.
Executive,
15 for bids?
yes.
Okay, so this is over that threshold, all right.
The school photo one is a horse of a different color because there's no district money in that at all. It's paid for directly by parents, so it's like,
I do it for
Right.
transparency
Gotcha.
purposes because it's.
Is it political?
No, but I think it's important that people know it's a component of, I think, student outcomes, you know.
It's come up before.
Yeah. Right.
All right, ready to move on? Agenda item 18, any questions on accounts payable orders 46, 47, and 48?
Do we need to have a motion for those other two, since
Oh,
you
yeah,
took
since
them
you
off?
took 'em off.
You took them off the,
I don't know, because we don't.
You just wanted to
we
talk
don't
about 'em.
Take action.
You just wanted to take,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
all right.
that's fine. Yeah.
Good question, though. I wouldn't know the answer to that.
Seeing none, I would also point you, before we adjourn, to the other paper article schedule, which is by your desks, or by your packets. Just take a quick look and verify that that's what we all agreed to last.
So what happens if I don't have a legislative update by the 28th of June?
Yeah, you just say,
That'll
Which
be the
is-
report
update.
what you have.
The going,
Have to scramble.
prediction is that it'll be 11 o'clock on the 30th of June, that we figured.
Thanks, Alan.
All right.
So we may have to, seriously, we may have to post it, because I think the big part of that is going to be funding and the school, and we may not know by the 28th. I will write something different. I'll just come up with something.
We'll talk then. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, yes, I move to adjourn.
And a second, all in favor? We got a few signatures here.